The blood-red sunset painted the horizon like spilled wine across Lordsburg's dusty Main Street when Willow Wade first saw the stranger who would change her life forever. The tall cowboy rode a midnight stallion that seemed to float above the dust, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, a stark contrast to the whispers that followed her like specters through town. Lordsburg, New Mexico Territory, 1878. A town that had seen its share of violence during the Apache Wars, now settled into an uneasy peace as silver mining and cattle drives brought prosperity to some and hardship to others. For 22-year-old Willow, it had become both refuge and prison after her father's passing 6 months prior. "There she goes again, talking to ghosts," Mabel Henderson whispered loudly to the general store proprietor as Willow passed. "Poor thing hasn't been right since her father died." Willow kept her eyes forward, clutching her basket tighter. She'd learned to ignore the stares, the whispers, the way conversation died when she entered a room. The townspeople had decided she'd gone mad with grief after burying her father, the only family she had left in the world. They didn't understand that the ghosts she spoke to were simply memories, conversations she continued in her mind with the father who had taught her everything from reading Shakespeare to tracking game. Nor did they understand the journals she kept, filled with observations of plants and wildlife that fascinated her curious mind. "Miss Wade," called out Mrs. Hollister from the millinery shop doorway, "I have that order of ribbon you asked for last week." Her voice was kind, but her eyes held that familiar mixture of pity and unease. "Thank you, Mrs. Hollister." Willow approached, aware of how the woman subtly stepped back as if madness might be catching. "The blue will be perfect for a commotion down the street," interrupted her words. 3 cowboys burst from the saloon, shoving a 4th man into the dirt. The fallen cowboy struggled to his feet only to be knocked down again, this time with a boot to his ribs. "That's what happens when you cheat at cards, O'Malley," one of the attackers spat. Willow froze, watching the scene unfold. Most townsfolk hurried inside or crossed to the other side of the street. Violence was common enough in Lordsburg to be ignored when possible. But something about the fallen man's dignity, the way he refused to beg even as he was outnumbered, made her hesitate. The stranger she'd noticed earlier dismounted his black stallion in one fluid motion and approached the altercation. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to danger. "3 against 1 seems unfair odds, gentlemen," his voice carried across the street, low and resonant with a hint of Texas in his drawl. "Mind your business, stranger," the largest attacker turned. "This cheating dog owes us money." The newcomer tilted his hat back, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, with piercing eyes the color of a summer storm. "I find it curious that the worst card players often cry cheat the loudest." The 3 cowboys exchanged glances, clearly weighing whether this stranger was worth the trouble. The tallest of them stepped forward, hand hovering near his holster. "You calling us liars now? I'm suggesting you might reconsider your approach." The stranger's coat shifted slightly, revealing the gleam of a silver star pinned to his vest. "Deputy Marshal Owen Garrett, I'm passing through on business, but I'd be happy to make your acquaintance officially if necessary." The men muttered curses but backed away, helping their drunken companion toward the saloon. Marshal Garrett extended a hand to the fallen man, helping him to his feet. "Thank you, Marshal," the man said, brushing dust from his clothes. "I wasn't cheating, but they'd lost too much to hear reason." "Best find another table next time." The marshal nodded before turning away. Willow realized she'd been staring only when his eyes met hers across the street. Instead of looking away as most people did when they caught her watching, he touched the brim of his hat in greeting. She hurried into the millinery shop, heart beating faster than it should. "That's the federal marshal passing through," Mrs. Hollister whispered, peering out the window. "They say he's tracking the Daniels gang, 3 bank robberies already in Arizona territory." Willow nodded politely, paying for her ribbon and leaving quickly. She needed to get home before dark. The small cabin she'd inherited from her father sat just outside town, close enough for necessity but far enough for the privacy she craved. As she walked the road leading out of town, she heard hoofbeats approaching from behind. The marshal rode alongside her, slowing his horse to match her pace. "Evening, miss. Mind if I escort you? Road can be dangerous this time of day." His voice was gentler than it had been with the cowboys. "I'm quite capable of walking home alone, Marshal," she replied, not breaking stride. "I've done it every day for years." "I've no doubt of your capability." A smile tugged at his mouth. "But I'd feel better knowing you arrived safely." Willow studied him. Most men in town either avoided her or treated her with condescending pity. This stranger's direct gaze held neither. "As you wish," she finally conceded. "It's not far." They continued in silence for several minutes before he spoke again. "I'm Owen Garrett, Willow Wade." "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Wade. New to Lordsburg myself, just passing through on business." "The Daniels gang, I heard." He raised an eyebrow. "News travels fast. Small towns have little entertainment beyond gossip." She adjusted her basket. "They'll be talking about you escorting me home for days." "Will that cause you trouble?" Willow laughed, a sound that surprised even herself. "Marshal, I'm already the town madwoman. Your company can hardly damage my reputation further." He frowned. "Madwoman, according to local wisdom." She gestured vaguely. "I live alone, speak my mind, collect wildflowers, and occasionally talk to myself. Highly suspicious behavior for a woman." The cabin came into view around the bend, a modest structure with a small garden and corral. A gray mule lifted its head at their approach, braying a greeting. "This is me," she said, stopping at the gate. "Thank you for the escort, unnecessary though it was." Owen dismounted, tying his horse to the fence post. "May I?" He gestured toward the property. Willow hesitated, then nodded. He walked the perimeter, checking windows and sight lines with practiced efficiency before returning. "Force of habit," he explained. "You've got a nice place, though a bit isolated." "I prefer it that way." She unlocked the door but didn't invite him in. "The town and I have an arrangement. They pretend I don't exist, and I return the favor when possible." "And do you?" he asked, his expression serious. "Do I what?" "Talk to yourself." Willow looked away. "My father was a learned man with a vast library." When you grow up discussing philosophy, literature, and science at the dinner table, it's hard to suddenly have no one to share thoughts with. She met his eyes defiantly. "So yes, I occasionally continue those conversations aloud." To her surprise, Owen nodded thoughtfully. "Makes perfect sense to me. I've had many a conversation with my horse on long trails. Sancho's a fine listener but offers little in the way of useful counsel." The stallion snorted as if in protest, making Willow smile. "Will you be in Lordsburg long, Marshal?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. "A few days, perhaps longer. The Daniels gang was spotted near here last week." He put his hat back on. "Good night, Miss Wade. Lock your door." Willow watched him ride away, a strange feeling settling in her chest, something like hope, though she barely recognized it anymore. The next morning, Willow headed into town for supplies with a basket of fresh herbs to trade at the apothecary. Mr. Finch, the elderly pharmacist, was one of the few people who treated her normally, appreciating her knowledge of medicinal plants. "Morning, Miss Wade," he smiled as she entered his shop. "Those look fine indeed, the feverfew especially." "Good morning, Mr. Finch." "I've brought yarrow as well and some elderberry you requested." She arranged the bundles on his counter. "Excellent, excellent. I've set aside those empty tincture bottles you wanted." He disappeared into the back room. While waiting, Willow examined a shelf of new patent medicines, reading the labels with skeptical interest. "Quite a collection of snake oil, isn't it?" She turned to find Marshal Garrett browsing nearby. "Some have merit," she replied. "Though I prefer remedies I can identify by more than fancy typography." A wise approach. He picked up a bottle claiming to cure everything from dropsy to melancholia. "My mother swore by willow bark tea for headaches, named me after the tree, in fact. Your mother named you Owen." He laughed, a warm sound that drew glances from other customers. "My mistake. She called me by my middle name, Willow." "You're teasing me now, perhaps a little." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "What brings you to the apothecary? Not feeling unwell, I hope." "I trade herbs from my garden." Mr. Finch appreciates plants that haven't crossed half the country in dubious conditions. Mr. Finch returned, setting a box on the counter. "Your bottles, Miss Wade," he noticed Owen. "Marshall, good morning. Anything I can help you with?" "Just browsing, thank you." Willow collected her trade goods and headed toward the door. Owen followed, holding it open for her. "May I walk with you?" he asked. "I find myself wanting to continue our conversation." Several passers-by slowed their pace, openly watching this interaction. Willow was accustomed to being stared at, but not with a handsome Marshall at her side. "I suppose," she said, stepping onto the boardwalk, "though I warn you, being seen with me might damage your reputation." "I'll risk it." He fell into step beside her. "I heard something interesting at breakfast this morning. Lordsburg gossip moves quickly." "So it seems. The hotel keeper told me you're the strange Wade girl who thinks she can talk to spirits and wanders the hills collecting cursed objects." Willow stopped walking, her cheeks flushing with anger and embarrassment. "And did you believe these tales?" "I make it a practice to form my own impressions." His voice remained calm. "You strike me as neither strange nor particularly given to supernatural pursuits." "I collect botanical specimens, plants, seeds, interesting rocks sometimes. My father was an amateur naturalist who taught me to observe the world carefully." She resumed walking, her pace quicker now. "As for talking to spirits, I talk to myself occasionally, as I explained." The dead remained stubbornly silent in my experience. They passed the general store where Mrs. Henderson stood sweeping, her broom slowing as she watched them with undisguised curiosity. "What happened?" Owen asked quietly. "There's usually some grain of truth that grows into these tall tales." Willow hesitated, unused to someone asking her side of things. "My father died 6 months ago, pneumonia. He was a professor back east before my mother's death brought us west. He educated me as he would have a university student. An unusual upbringing for a young woman, hence the problem. I don't fit their expectations of proper womanhood. I read books instead of attending socials. I can identify constellations but struggle with small talk." She shrugged. "Then when father died, I had difficulty. I would forget where I was sometimes, talk to him as if he were still there. The grief made me distracted. That's hardly madness. There was an incident." Willow stopped walking again, debating whether to continue. Something in Owen's steady gaze encouraged her. "I was gathering plants up in the foothills last spring. There's a place where rare orchids grow. I lost track of time and a storm came suddenly. By the time I found shelter in an abandoned mining cabin, I was soaked through and freezing. You caught ill, fever, delirium. I was missing for 2 days before Sheriff Palmer found me, babbling nonsense about flowers that sing and stars falling to earth." She smiled tightly. "When I recovered, the story had transformed. People claimed I'd been conducting witchcraft, communing with spirits, all manner of nonsense. And rather than defend yourself, what would be the point? They'd already decided." She nodded toward the mercantile ahead. "I need to get supplies. You needn't accompany me further." "Actually, I'm headed there myself." Owen touched her elbow gently as they crossed the muddy street. "Miss Wade, people fear what they don't understand. You've been educated beyond most in this town, men included. Being feared isn't any better than being pitied." "No, it isn't." Inside the mercantile, conversations hushed as they entered together. The store owner, Mr. Peterson, greeted them with barely concealed surprise. "Marshall, Miss Wade, what can I help you with today?" "Just the usual, Mr. Peterson," Willow said, handing him her list. "And some coffee, please." While the shopkeeper gathered her items, Willow became acutely aware of whispers behind them. She kept her eyes on the display of canned goods, pretending not to hear, talking to the mad girl, probably investigating her. "They say she dances with coyotes under the full moon." Owen stepped closer to her, speaking just loudly enough to be overheard. "Miss Wade, I meant to ask if you might show me those medicinal plants you mentioned. As a lawman traveling rough country, such knowledge could prove invaluable." The whispers intensified. Willow looked up at him, understanding what he was doing, challenging the gossips directly. "I'd be happy to, Marshall," she replied, matching his volume. "Though I'm sure a man of your experience already knows much about survival in the wilderness. One can always learn more from an expert." He smiled, his eyes never leaving hers. Mr. Peterson returned with her supplies packed in a crate. "That'll be $1.35, Miss Wade," she paid, and Owen immediately lifted the heavy crate. "Allow me." Outside, Willow finally released the laugh she'd been suppressing. "You've certainly given them something new to talk about, Marshal Garrett." "Owen, please." He shifted the crate to a more comfortable position. "And I merely spoke the truth. I would value learning about medicinal plants from someone knowledgeable." "You were being kind." She took the lighter of her packages. "But thank you." They walked toward her cabin in companionable silence. The afternoon sun beat down on the dusty road, and Willow found herself grateful for both the help with her supplies and the company. "May I ask about your work?" she ventured. "Is tracking outlaws as exciting as the dime novels suggest?" Owen chuckled. "Mostly it's uncomfortable travel, cold camps, and asking the same questions in every town until someone finally gives you information worth having. Excitement usually means something's gone wrong." "And the Daniels gang, are they as dangerous as people say?" His expression grew serious. "3 men, led by Frank Daniels. They've robbed banks in Tucson, Bisbee, and last week in Silver City. They killed a teller in Bisbee who tried to sound the alarm." "And you think they're coming to Lordsburg next?" "The gang has a pattern of hitting towns along the southern Pacific line. With the silver shipments coming through next week, Lordsburg Bank would be tempting." He glanced at her. "But that's not for public knowledge yet." "I'm hardly in a position to spread gossip," she smiled wryly. "Few people speak to me long enough to hear any." They reached her cabin, and Owen set the crate on her porch. "Thank you for the company, Willow. I meant what I said about the plants. I could show you tomorrow if you'd like. There's a place not far from here with quite a variety." "I'd like that very much." He hesitated. "Perhaps we could make a day of it. I could bring lunch." Willow felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the town's rumors. "That would be nice. Until tomorrow, then." He tipped his hat and walked to where Sancho waited patiently. As she watched him ride back toward town, Willow realized she was smiling, really smiling, for the first time in months. The next morning dawned clear and warm, typical for late spring in the New Mexico territory. Willow rose early, both excited and nervous about the day ahead. She chose her most practical dress, a simple blue cotton with enough room to move freely, and braided her chestnut hair tightly to keep it contained during their excursion. By 9 o'clock, she was checking her supplies for the third time: plant identification guide, small trowel, sample bags, canteen. She jumped at the sound of hoofbeats approaching, smoothing her skirt self-consciously before stepping onto the porch. Owen rode up leading a second horse, a gentle-looking dun mare. He'd foregone his marshal's coat for a simple shirt and vest, though she noticed he still wore his sidearm. "Good morning," he called, dismounting. "I hope you don't mind, but I borrowed a horse from the livery for you." "Walking those hills would be arduous." "That was thoughtful, thank you." Willow approached the mare cautiously. "It's been some time since I've ridden. Father sold our horse last winter when his health began failing. Daisy here is steady as they come." Owen watched as Willow offered her palm for the mare to sniff. "We don't have to go far if you're uncomfortable." "No, it's fine. I'd like to show you the upper meadow. The variety there is exceptional." She stroked Daisy's neck, reacquainting herself with the feel of a horse. "Do you have saddlebags for the specimens we collect?" Owen patted the leather pouches behind his saddle. "And lunch, as promised." He helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. They rode at a leisurely pace, Willow leading them along a narrow trail that wound through scrubby juniper and pinyon pine. The terrain grew rockier as they climbed, the desert giving way to more varied vegetation. "Most people see only barrenness here," Willow said, gesturing to the landscape. "But there's extraordinary diversity if you look closely. Plants that have adapted to survive drought, heat, poor soil, they're marvels of resilience." Owen studied her animated expression. "Your father taught you well. He believed education shouldn't be limited by gender. Said my mind was too curious to waste on just household arts." A shadow crossed her face. "Mother didn't agree. Their arguments over my upbringing were legendary before she died." "How old were you when you lost her?" 12. Cholera." We came west a year later, father taking a position at a small college in Santa Fe. When that closed, we moved to Lordsburg where he tutored mining engineers' children. She guided Daisy around a boulder. Your family, are they in Texas? Parents died in a flood when I was 16. I worked cattle drives until I was 20, then became a deputy in El Paso. Joined the Marshal's service 4 years ago, so young to be on your own. Had an older brother who looked out for me until he took a bullet in Dodge City, occupational hazard for lawmen. His tone was matter-of-fact, but Willow detected the old pain beneath it. I'm sorry. Long time ago now. He changed the subject. Tell me about these plants we're seeking. They spent the morning in the high meadow, Willow enthusiastically showing Owen plants that could stop bleeding, reduce fever, or treat infections. He proved an attentive student, asking intelligent questions and carefully labeling the samples they collected. This one, she said, kneeling beside a small flowering plant, is yarrow, excellent for wounds. You crush the leaves and apply them directly to stop bleeding. Owen crouched beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. Same plant the ancient Greeks used on battlefield wounds, isn't it? Willow looked up, surprised. Yes, exactly. Achillea millefolium, named for Achilles. I read when I can, history mostly, some science when I understand it. His eyes crinkled. Though I lack your formal education, you're being modest. Most college-educated men I've met couldn't identify yarrow or know its classical connections. They moved from plant to plant, the morning passing quickly. At noon, Owen unpacked lunch, fresh bread, cheese, dried apples, and jerky, with a small jar of honey for dessert. This is wonderful, Willow said, savoring the simple meal as they sat in the shade of a large juniper. I rarely picnic anymore. Father and I used to bring books and spend whole days reading in spots like this. You must miss him terribly. Every day, she wrapped her arms around her knees. He was brilliant but impractical, could lecture for hours on astronomy but couldn't cook to save his life. After Mother died, we became partners of sorts. I managed our home, he managed my education. And now you're alone, I manage. She looked out over the vista below Lordsburg, a tiny collection of buildings in the distance. Though the isolation can be difficult, it doesn't have to be, you know. Owen's voice was gentle. People fear what they don't understand, but fear can be overcome. The rumors have taken on a life of their own. I've become a convenient explanation for any misfortune crops fail. It must be the mad Wade girl's curse. Child falls ill, they whisper I've been gathering poisonous herbs. She shook her head. It would be amusing if it weren't so lonely. You've never considered leaving, starting fresh somewhere else. With what resources? Father left debts, the cabin is mine free and clear, but I have little else. She began packing away their lunch things. Besides, I'm not convinced another town would be different. Women alone are always subject to suspicion. Owen touched her hand lightly. You have extraordinary knowledge, Willow. That has value, in a place that values such things, perhaps. She stood, brushing crumbs from her skirt. Shall we continue? There's a ravine with some interesting ferns if you're not tired of my botanical ramblings. Lead on. I find your ramblings fascinating. They spent another 2 hours exploring, their conversation flowing easily between plants, books, and shared observations about the world. Willow couldn't remember the last time she talked so freely with anyone, certainly not a man who seemed to value her thoughts without judgment. As they headed back toward her cabin in the late afternoon, dark clouds gathered on the western horizon. Storm coming, Owen noted, eyeing the sky. We should hurry. They quickened their pace, but the storm moved faster. When they were still a mile from her cabin, fat raindrops began to fall, quickly becoming a downpour. Thunder cracked overhead as lightning split the sky. There's a line shack just ahead, Willow shouted over the deluge, pointing to a small structure barely visible through the rain. We can wait it out there. They urged their horses forward, reaching the abandoned herder's shelter just as hail began to mix with the rain. Inside, the crude cabin offered basic protection: 4 walls, a roof with only minor leaks, and a stone fireplace. Are you all right? Owen asked as they shook water from their clothes. You're soaked through. Willow wrung water from her skirt, suddenly conscious of how the wet fabric clung to her. I'm fine. These summer storms pass quickly. Owen found old kindling by the fireplace and soon had a small fire going, its warmth welcome in the suddenly cooler air. Willow spread her shawl near the flames to dry, then sat on an overturned crate, working to rebraid her hair which had come loose during their dash to safety. Here. Owen offered his bandana. For your face. She took it gratefully, patting her dripping skin. Thank you. Some botanist I am, failing to anticipate the weather. The storm built quickly, no one's fault. He sat opposite her, removing his hat to shake off the water. His dark hair curled damply at his neck, giving him a younger appearance. Still, I should have been more attentive to the signs. I was. She hesitated, distracted by our conversation, as was I. Owen's gray eyes held her steadily. I've enjoyed today immensely, Willow. The way he said her name sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. She looked away, suddenly shy. So have I, it's been. I can't remember when I last spoke so freely with anyone. Nor can I. He leaned forward, firelight casting shadows across his features. May I ask you something personal? She nodded, her pulse quickening. The incident you mentioned, when you were found delirious in the hills, is that truly when the town turned against you? Not what she'd expected. Partly. There were always whispers about the odd professor and his blue-stocking daughter. After father died, my behavior gave them justification for suspicions they'd always harbored. What happened exactly during those days you were missing? Willow sighed. I remember very little. The fever was high. Sheriff Palmer found me on the second day, barely conscious, talking nonsense apparently. Dr. Simmons later told me I spoke of trees that walked and stars falling into my hands. She smiled faintly. By the time I recovered, rumors claimed I'd been conducting rituals, communicating with spirits, even transforming into animals. And no one defended you. Who would? Father was gone. I kept to myself mostly. She twisted her hands in her lap. Sheriff Palmer tried to quell the worst tales, but people believe what they wish to believe. Thunder crashed directly overhead, making her jump. Owen moved to sit beside her, his proximity both comforting and unsettling. I'm sorry this happened to you, he said quietly. Ignorance can be crueler than deliberate malice. It's taught me self-reliance, if nothing else. She attempted a smile. Though days like today remind me what I've lost, simple conversation, the exchange of ideas being seen as human, I suppose, rather than some curiosity or threat. Without warning, Owen reached out, brushing a strand of wet hair from her cheek. The gentle touch sent warmth spreading through her despite her damp clothes. I see you, Willow Wade, he said, his voice low. I see a brilliant, resilient woman who deserves far better than what life has handed her. The rain drummed on the roof, filling the silence that followed his words. Willow became acutely aware of their isolation, the intimacy of the small cabin, how close they sat together. Owen, she began, uncertain what she meant to say. He leaned closer, his intention clear in his eyes. Tell me to stop, and I will. She didn't tell him to stop. Instead, she closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his with a certainty that surprised them both. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as Owen's hand moved to cradle her face. Willow felt something unfurl within her chest, a warmth, a longing she'd suppressed for too long. When they finally parted, both were breathing quickly. I shouldn't have done that, she whispered. Do you regret it? She shook her head. But you're leaving soon. And you're extraordinary, he finished for her. And I find myself wishing I didn't have to leave. The storm's intensity lessened, rain softening to a steady patter. Reluctantly, they moved apart, the spell of the moment broken but not forgotten. We should go while there's still daylight, Owen said, standing to check the weather outside. The worst has passed. They rode back to her cabin in companionable silence, both processing what had happened between them. At her door, Owen helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. Will I see you tomorrow? She asked. I need to meet with Sheriff Palmer in the morning about security for the bank, but perhaps I could call on you in the afternoon. I'd like that. She hesitated, then added, I could cook supper if you'd care to stay. His smile was answer enough. Until tomorrow, then. As he rode away, Willow touched her lips, still feeling the impression of his kiss. For the first time in months, the loneliness that had become her constant companion seemed to lift, replaced by a cautious hope. The next afternoon, Willow nervously prepared for Owen's visit, sweeping the cabin's plank floors and arranging wildflowers in a mason jar on the table. She'd spent the morning baking bread and preparing a rabbit stew, wanting everything to be perfect. A knock at the door startled her from adjusting the flowers for the third time. She smoothed her best dress, a sage green cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar, and opened the door. Owen stood on her porch, looking more formal than the day before in his marshal's coat, holding his hat in one hand and a small paper-wrapped package in the other. "You look lovely," he said by way of greeting. Willow felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, please come in." He stepped inside, surveying the cabin with interest. Though small, the space was neat and surprisingly well appointed. Bookshelves lined one wall filled with volumes on every subject. A desk beneath the window held papers, jars of specimens, and an open journal. The furnishings were simple but carefully kept. "Your home suits you," Owen said, handing her the package. "This is for you, nothing fancy, but I thought you might like it." Willow unwrapped the paper to find a small leather-bound notebook with an attached pencil. "It's perfect," she said, genuinely touched. "Thank you for your plant observations. The shopkeeper said it was waterproof leather." He glanced at the pot bubbling on the stove. "Something smells wonderful, rabbit stew. It needs another hour." She set the notebook carefully on her desk. "Would you like coffee, or I have some apple cider?" "Cider would be nice." As she poured their drinks, Owen browsed her bookshelf, running his fingers along the spines. "Impressive collection, your father's." "Most of them. I've added a few since his passing." She handed him a cup. "Do you read much on your travels?" "When I can. Carrying books while tracking outlaws isn't practical, but I try to find reading material in the towns I visit." He selected a volume of Thoreau. "This was my brother's favorite. He would quote it endlessly on the trail." "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately," Willow recited. "To front only the essential facts of life," Owen continued, "and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived." They shared a smile of recognition, a connection forged through words written by a man neither had met but both understood. "Tell me about your meeting with the sheriff," Willow said as they sat at her small table. "Is there news of the Daniels gang?" Owen's expression grew serious. "They were spotted near Deeming yesterday. We're expecting them to make a move on the Lordsburg bank within the next few days when the silver shipment arrives." "That sounds dangerous." "It is, which is why I need to ask something of you." He leaned forward. "When it happens, I want you to stay here, away from town. The gang has a reputation for excessive violence. Of course, I have no desire to witness a bank robbery." "Good." He seemed relieved. "Sheriff Palmer and I are setting up additional security, but civilians should stay clear if possible." They talked through the afternoon, moving easily between serious topics and lighter conversation. As Willow served the stew, she found herself wishing the evening would never end, that this comfortable domesticity could somehow extend beyond the brief time they had together. "This is delicious," Owen said appreciatively. "You're a woman of many talents, Willow Wade. Simple country cooking, that's all. Father and I learned to make do with what we had." "That's a valuable skill. I've eaten my share of terrible camp food over the years." He refilled their cups. "May I ask what you plan to do now? With your father gone, I mean." Willow considered the question. "Honestly, I haven't thought much beyond survival. The garden provides food, I trade herbs for necessities, and I have some income from continuing father's work." His work. He corresponded with universities back east, sending plant and geological specimens. "I've maintained those contacts. It's not much money, but it helps." Owen nodded thoughtfully. "Have you considered formalizing that work? There are institutions that employ naturalists for field research." "As a woman, without formal credentials," she shook her head. "Besides, who would write my recommendation? The townspeople who think I'm deranged." "I would." His voice was firm. "And I know others who would value your knowledge if they saw your work." The sincerity in his eyes made her throat tighten. "That's kind," but a sudden pounding at the door interrupted her. Owen was on his feet instantly, hand moving to his sidearm. "Marshal Garrett, you in there?" Sheriff Palmer's voice called. Owen opened the door to find the sheriff on horseback, his expression urgent. "They're here," Palmer said without preamble. "Daniel's gang just rode into town, 3 men heavily armed asking questions about the bank's schedule. Earlier than we expected." Owen turned to Willow. "I have to go." "I understand." She stood in the doorway, fear clutching at her chest. "Please be careful." "Stay here," he emphasized. "Lock your door and don't open it for anyone but me." He mounted Sancho quickly, exchanging rapid-fire questions with the sheriff as they prepared to ride. Before they departed, Owen turned back to Willow. "This isn't goodbye," he promised. "I'll return when it's over." Then they were gone, hoofbeats fading into the distance as Willow stood watching, her heart racing with both fear for Owen and a strange, growing certainty that everything was about to change. She closed and locked the door as instructed, then moved to the window, staring in the direction of town. Though Lordsburg was too far to see clearly, she imagined she could make out the pattern of buildings, the church steeple, the dusty streets where danger now lurked. "Please come back to me," she whispered, the words surprising her with their implication. She barely knew this man, and yet the thought of losing him was suddenly, acutely painful. Hours passed, the waiting unbearable. Willow tried reading, then organizing her specimens, anything to keep her mind occupied. When darkness fell, she lit lamps but avoided placing them near windows, not wanting to attract attention if the outlaws fled in her direction. Just after midnight, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Grabbing her father's old shotgun from above the door, she moved to the window, peering cautiously through the curtain. Relief flooded through her at the sight of Owen dismounting, followed immediately by alarm when she saw him clutching his left arm, dark stains spreading across his sleeve. She rushed to unlock the door. "Owen, what happened? Are you hurt?" "Just a graze," he grimaced, stepping inside, "but I need your help." She helped him to a chair, her hands steady despite her fear. "Take off your coat and shirt, I'll get water and bandages." As she gathered supplies, Owen recounted what had happened. "They hit the bank earlier than planned. We were setting up positions when they started shooting. Palmer took one down, I wounded another, but Daniels himself escaped with some of the money." Willow returned with a basin of water, clean cloths, and her medicinal supplies. She carefully helped him remove his bloodied shirt, trying to maintain professional detachment as she assessed the wound on his upper arm. "The bullet didn't stay in," she noted with relief, cleaning around the angry furrow. "But it's deep enough to need stitching." Owen nodded grimly. "Figured as much. You know how? Father taught me basic medicine. I've stitched wounds before, though usually on him." She prepared a needle and thread, then hesitated. "I have willow bark extract for the pain." "Just do it," he said, jaw clenched. "I've had worse." Willow worked quickly, her movements precise despite her racing heart. Owen remained stoic, only the occasional sharp intake of breath betraying his pain. When she finished, she applied a salve of yarrow and calendula before bandaging the wound. "There." She tied off the bandage. "Not my neatest work, but it should hold. Thank you." Owen caught her hand as she turned to put away her supplies. "Willow, I need to tell you something." The seriousness in his tone made her pause. "What is it?" "Frank Daniels got away, but he's wounded and desperate. The money he took was marked. He can't use it in any town nearby." Owen's grip on her hand tightened. "He knows I'm a marshal if he discovers where I am. You think he might come here?" Willow felt cold dread settle in her stomach. "It's unlikely. He's probably halfway to Mexico by now, but I can't stay and risk bringing danger to your door." He stood slowly, wincing at the movement. "I need to join the posse tracking him at first light." "You're in no condition to ride," she protested. "The wound could reopen." "I don't have a choice. It's my duty." Willow recognized the resolve in his eyes, arguing would be futile. "Then let me give you something for the pain, and you should rest until morning at least." She prepared a strong tea of willow bark and valerian root, urging him to drink it all. The hour was late, and exhaustion showed clearly on Owen's face, made worse by blood loss and the fading rush of danger. "You can take my bed," she offered. "I'll sleep in the chair." I won't take your bed, Willow. Don't be foolish. You're injured and need proper rest. She pointed firmly toward the small bedroom. I insist. Too tired to argue further, Owen acquiesced. Willow helped him to the bed, trying not to notice how the lamplight played across his bare chest or how his breath caught when her fingers accidentally brushed his skin. Try to sleep, she said, turning to leave. Willow. His voice stopped her at the door. Thank you for everything. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and closed the door behind her. In the main room, Willow settled into her father's old armchair, wrapped in a quilt. Sleep eluded her as her mind replayed the events of the day, from their pleasant dinner to the sudden violence that had intruded. She thought of Owen leaving in the morning, potentially never returning, and felt an ache in her chest that couldn't be explained by their brief acquaintance. Despite her intention to remain vigilant, exhaustion eventually won out. She dozed fitfully, waking at the first light of dawn to find Owen standing over her, fully dressed despite his injury. You should have slept longer, she chided, rising stiffly from the chair. Sheriff Palmer will be gathering the posse soon. He looked better than the night before, though still pale. I've taken the liberty of making coffee. They shared a silent breakfast, the weight of his imminent departure hanging between them. When hoofbeats sounded outside announcing the sheriff's arrival, Owen stood reluctantly. I have to go. I know. Willow handed him a small pouch. Herbs for your wound. Change the bandage tonight if you can. He took the pouch, his fingers lingering on hers. Willow, when this is over, Marshal, Sheriff Palmer called from outside, we're losing daylight. Owen's expression hardened with frustration. I have to see this through, but I promise I'll come back. You don't owe me anything, she said quietly. We've known each other 3 days, the longest and shortest 3 days of my life. He stepped closer, cupping her face in his hand. I'm coming back, that's a promise. Their kiss was brief but fierce, filled with possibilities neither had time to voice. Then he was gone, joining the posse of 6 men who barely acknowledged Willow standing in the doorway. She watched until they disappeared from sight, then closed the door and leaned against it, wondering if promises made in the heat of danger and attraction could possibly survive the cold light of ordinary days. A week passed with no word. Willow tried to resume her normal routine, tending the garden, preserving early summer vegetables, corresponding with her scientific contacts, but worry gnawed at her constantly. Had Owen been hurt again? Had they caught Frank Daniels? Or had Owen simply moved on to his next assignment, his promise to return forgotten in the face of duty? On the 8th day, she ventured into town for supplies, steeling herself for the usual whispers and stares. To her surprise, the reception was different. People still watched her, but the usual hostility seemed muted, replaced by something closer to curiosity. Mr. Peterson at the Mercantile actually smiled as she entered. Miss Wade, good morning. I set aside those canning jars you mentioned needing last time. Thank you, she replied, puzzled by the change. That was thoughtful. Least I could do after you helped the marshal with his injury. The shopkeeper leaned forward conspirationally. Sheriff told us how you tended his wound that night, probably saved him from fever or worse. So that explained it. Her association with the marshal and her role in the aftermath of the robbery had shifted her status somehow. Willow wasn't sure whether to be grateful or annoyed that it had taken a man's validation to make the townspeople see her differently. Any news of the marshal and the posse? She asked casually, selecting items from the shelves. They caught up to Daniels at the border 2 days ago. Nasty firefight from what we heard. Daniels didn't survive. Mr. Peterson handed her a newspaper from Santa Fe. It's mentioned here, though not in detail. Willow scanned the article quickly, her heart racing. It noted the death of notorious outlaw Frank Daniels in a confrontation with lawmen led by U.S. Marshal Owen Garrett, but gave no information about casualties among the posse. Were there any injuries? To our men, I mean, she tried to keep her voice level. Sheriff Palmer took a bullet in the leg. He's recovering at Doc Simmons' place. Mr. Peterson shook his head. Don't know about the others, they haven't returned yet. Willow completed her purchases in a daze of worry. If Owen were uninjured, wouldn't he have returned by now? The border was only 3 days' ride. unless his duties had taken him elsewhere immediately, or unless she couldn't bear to complete the thought as she left the store. Mrs. Hollister called to her from the millinery shop. "Miss Wade, a moment, please." Warily, Willow approached. The older woman had never been openly hostile, but neither had she been particularly friendly. "I wanted to thank you for showing the marshal those medicinal plants, Mrs. Hollister said, surprising Willow completely. "My Henry was with the posse, and he said your yarrow poultice saved Ted Wilson's arm after he was shot." "I'm glad it helped," Willow replied, still confused by this sudden change in attitude. Henry said. Mrs. Hollister hesitated. "He said the marshal spoke highly of your knowledge, said you knew more about practical medicine than most doctors he'd encountered." Marshal Garrett was very kind. Willow shifted uncomfortably under the woman's gaze. "Did Henry mention when they might return?" "They're escorting Sheriff Palmer home slowly because of his injury. Should be another day or two." Mrs. Hollister gave her a knowing look. "The marshal asked specifically about you, according to Henry. Wanted to know if you were well." Hope bloomed in Willow's chest. "He did, indeed." "Seemed quite concerned." The older woman smiled slightly. "Perhaps we've misjudged you, Miss Wade. Anyone the marshal holds in such esteem must have qualities worth knowing better." Willow hardly knew how to respond to this backhanded acknowledgement. "Thank you, Mrs. Hollister. I should be getting home now." The walk back to her cabin seemed shorter than usual, her steps lightened by the knowledge that Owen was alive and would return soon. The town's changed attitude toward her was secondary, a curious development, but less important than the prospect of seeing him again. 2 more days passed in anxious anticipation. Willow found herself checking the road more often than necessary, starting at the sound of approaching riders. She told herself not to hope too much, that Owen's promise might have been made in a moment of heightened emotion, that his duties would likely take him away again regardless. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, she was in her garden harvesting beans when she heard a horse approaching. She straightened slowly, shading her eyes against the sun, heart pounding as she recognized the rider. Owen dismounted before Sancho had fully stopped, his movements betraying urgency despite obvious fatigue. He looked trail-worn and thinner, with several days' growth of beard, but his eyes lit up when they found hers. "You're here," he said simply, as if he'd half expected her to have vanished. "Where else would I be?" Willow remained rooted in place, suddenly unsure. The week of separation loomed between them, making her question what she'd thought they'd shared. Owen crossed the distance between them in long strides. Without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms, his kiss dispelling any doubts about his intentions. Willow responded with equal fervor, her hands clutching the fabric of his coat as if to assure herself he was real. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I told you I'd come back. You did." She touched his face, feeling the rough stubble beneath her fingers. "I heard about Daniels and Sheriff Palmer's injury. It was a close thing. We nearly lost Palmer." His arms tightened around her. "All I could think about was getting back to you. And now you're here." She stepped back slightly, suddenly conscious that they were embracing in broad daylight where anyone passing might see. "You must be exhausted. Come inside." In the cabin, Owen removed his coat and hat, revealing the toll the pursuit had taken. Though his wound had healed well, new scratches marked his face, and the shadows under his eyes spoke of too little sleep. "Sit," Willow commanded, pouring water from the pitcher. "When did you last eat properly?" "Can't remember," he admitted, accepting the water gratefully. "We pushed hard to get Palmer back safely." She quickly prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold chicken left from her supper the previous night. As Owen ate, she found herself studying him, memorizing the lines of his face, the way his hair curled at his temples, the strength in his hands. "What happens now?" she asked finally, the question she'd been avoiding. Owen set down his empty plate, meeting her gaze directly. "That depends on you, on me. I've been thinking about what to say to you since the moment I left." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I know it's fast. I know we've known each other barely 2 weeks, but I've never met anyone like you, Willow." Her heart beat so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "What are you saying, Owen?" "I'm saying I don't want to leave again without knowing there's something to come back to." He reached for her hand. My assignment in this territory is finished. I'm due to report to Tucson next week for new orders. Disappointment washed over her. So you are leaving? Yes, but he squeezed her hand. I want you to come with me. Willow stared at him, speechless. I know it's sudden, he continued quickly. And I know you have your home here, your work. I wouldn't ask you to give that up completely. But I thought there's a university in Tucson. They have a botanical garden. You could continue your research there, maybe even formally. You've thought about this, she said softly. Every mile of the journey back, he smiled, a touch of nervousness showing through his usual confidence. I'm not offering a conventional life, Willow. Marshals move where they're needed, but we could build something together, something real. Owen, she hesitated, overwhelmed. The town would say I've truly lost my mind, abandoning everything to follow a man I barely know. His expression turned serious. Then I'll lose mine to keep you sane. What do you mean? I mean I'll stay. I'll resign my position, find work locally, whatever it takes. He knelt before her chair, taking both her hands in his. I've spent my life chasing outlaws across territories, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots, but these past 2 weeks have shown me what I've been missing. Willow felt tears welling in her eyes. You'd give up your career. For me, for us, he corrected. I'm 34 years old, Willow. I've seen enough violence to last several lifetimes. Maybe it's time for something different. She touched his face wonderingly. I don't want you to resent me later for making you choose. There's no choice to make, not really. He turned his face to kiss her palm. I love you, Willow Wade. I think I started falling the moment you told me you talked to yourself because you missed intellectual conversation. A laugh escaped through her tears. That's possibly the strangest declaration of love I've ever heard. Is it working? His eyes held hope and vulnerability. Instead of answering directly, Willow leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all her feelings into the gesture. When they separated, she smiled. I love you too, and I don't want to stay in Lordsburg. You don't. This place holds too many painful memories, and despite their recent change of heart, these people never truly saw me until you did. She took a deep breath. I want to go with you to Tucson. I want to see what life could be like somewhere new with someone who believes in me. Joy transformed Owen's face. Are you certain? I've never been more certain of anything, she laughed suddenly. The town really will think I've lost my mind. Let them talk. He pulled her to her feet, wrapping her in his arms. We'll be too busy building our future to listen. 2 weeks later, Willow stood in her cabin one last time, surveying the space that had been her home for years. Most of her father's books were carefully packed, along with her specimens, journals, and the personal items she couldn't bear to leave behind. The furniture would remain. She'd sold the cabin to a young couple moving to Lordsburg, grateful for the furnished home. Ready, Owen appeared in the doorway, having loaded the last of her trunks onto the wagon. Almost. She touched the desk where her father had taught her, the walls that had sheltered both their dreams and disappointments. It feels strange, leaving it all behind. Not all, Owen reminded her. Your father's knowledge lives in you, his books go with us, his legacy continues. Willow nodded, blinking back unexpected tears. You're right, it's just a house in the end. Our train leaves in 2 hours. We should go if we want to make it. He offered his hand. She took it, squeezing gently. I'm ready. Outside, several townspeople had gathered to see them off, a surprise that moved Willow deeply. Mrs. Hollister presented her with a small parcel. A wedding gift, she explained. Just some handkerchiefs I embroidered. Every bride needs something new. Thank you, Willow said sincerely. Their impromptu wedding 2 days earlier had been a small affair at the Justice of the Peace, with only Sheriff Palmer and Dr. Simmons as witnesses. The gesture from Mrs. Hollister felt like an unexpected blessing from the community that had so long ostracized her. Mr. Finch approached next, handing her a wooden box. My finest collection of empty tincture bottles, he said with a wink. For your new laboratory, wherever it may be. One by one, the townspeople offered small tokens and good wishes. Not everyone was present. Some prejudices ran too deep to overcome, but enough had come to suggest that perceptions truly had shifted. When the goodbyes were complete, Owen helped Willow onto the wagon seat beside him. As they pulled away, she looked back one last time at the cabin on the hill, the town below, the landscape that had shaped her life. Having second thoughts, Owen asked gently. No, she turned to him, resolve strengthening. I'm having first thoughts about our new beginning. He smiled, the expression lighting his eyes in a way that still made her heart skip. Then let's not keep the future waiting. The wagon rolled forward, bearing them toward the train station, toward Tucson, toward a life neither could fully envision yet but both eagerly anticipated. Behind them, Lordsburg grew smaller, the whispers and judgments fading with distance. Ahead lay uncertainty, adventure, and the promise of love that had found them against all odds a marshal who had tracked outlaws across territories, only to discover his heart's true destination. And a woman labeled mad by those who couldn't understand her, now embracing a future where being understood was no longer a distant dream but a daily reality. The town said I lost my mind, Willow mused, watching the landscape roll by. Owen's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. And I lost mine to keep you sane. She laughed, the sound carrying on the wind. Perhaps we're both a little mad. The best kind of madness, he agreed. The kind that leads to happiness. As the train whistle sounded in the distance, Willow felt the last of her doubts dissolve. They were writing their own story now, one that began with whispers and misunderstandings, but would continue with clarity and purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, the marshal who had found something worth protecting beyond law and order, and the woman who had finally found someone who saw not madness in her differences, but brilliance. Lordsburg would remember them in its own way, their story becoming part of local lore, how Marshal Garrett had defended the mad Wade girl, fallen in love with her, and taken her away to a new life. Some would romanticize it, others would scorn it, but none would know the truth that Willow and Owen carried in their hearts. That sometimes, losing one's mind meant finding one's soul. 5 years later, Tucson, Arizona Territory, 1883, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the small house on the edge of the university grounds, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden light. Willow Garrett sat at her desk, carefully labeling a series of plant specimens collected during her recent expedition to the Catalina Mountains. "Mama, look!" 3-year-old James burst into the study, clutching a strange-looking insect in his cupped hands. "Found a bug." Willow set down her pen, smiling at her son's enthusiasm. With his father's gray eyes and her chestnut hair, James was a perfect blend of them both and had inherited their shared curiosity about the natural world. "Let's see what you've discovered, my little scientist." She crouched to his level, examining the beetle. "That's a darkling beetle. They're quite special to the desert. Can I keep him?" James looked up hopefully. "We should return him to his home outside, but first, let's draw him in your observation journal so you'll always remember him." The boy nodded solemnly, his face lighting up at the mention of the small notebook where Willow encouraged him to record his discoveries, much like the leather-bound journal Owen had given her years ago, now filled with observations and memories. "Where's Papa?" James asked as they sketched the beetle together. "Meeting with the sheriff. He'll be home for lunch." Willow guided her son's hand as he added details to his drawing. "Shall we make lemonade to surprise him?" Before James could answer, a cry came from the next room. Willow rose, touching her son's head affectionately. "Finish your drawing. I need to check on your sister." In the nursery, 6-month-old Alina was awake from her nap, small fists waving in the air. Willow lifted her daughter, inhaling the sweet baby scent as she cradled her close. "Hello, my darling girl. Did you have a good sleep?" She changed and dressed the baby, carrying her to the kitchen where James had already climbed onto a chair, eager to help with the lemonade. With Alina balanced on one hip, Willow supervised as her son carefully squeezed lemons into a pitcher. Their domestic harmony was interrupted by the sound of boots on the porch. James jumped down, running to the door as Owen entered, still wearing the silver star that denoted his position as deputy marshal, a compromise that had allowed him to remain based in Tucson rather than traveling constantly. "Papa," James launched himself into his father's arms. Owen caught him, swinging him high before settling him on his hip. There's my boy. Have you been helping your mother? I found a bug and drew it in my book. A fine discovery. Owen crossed to Willow, kissing her softly before bending to press his lips to Aliner's forehead. And how are my beautiful girls today? Productive, Willow answered, gesturing toward the kitchen where specimen jars lined the windowsill. The university wants my report on medicinal plants of the Catalinas by next week. Professor Wade Garrett, always working. Owen's proud smile made her heart swell. The university position had come slowly, first as a research assistant, then lecturer, and finally as a special adjunct professor in botany, one of the few women in such a role in the territory. "How was your meeting?" she asked, handing a leaner to him so she could finish the lemonade. "Routine. Mostly paperwork these days." He bounced the baby gently, making her gurgle with delight. "Sheriff Williams mentioned your lecture last week, said half the town attended." "Hardly half," Willow demurred, though she couldn't hide her pleasure. Her public talks on practical medicine and native plants had become surprisingly popular, attended by both university students and townspeople. Though Mrs. Henderson did bring her sewing circle. Speaking of Lordsburg, Owen set James down and reached into his coat. "Letter came for you on yesterday's train, from Dr. Simmons." Willow took the envelope curiously. She maintained correspondence with a few people from Lordsburg, Mr. Finch, Dr. Simmons, even Sheriff Palmer occasionally, but letters had become less frequent as they all settled into their separate lives. She opened it as Owen took over lemonade duty, reading quickly while the children played at her feet. Her expression grew serious, then thoughtful. "What is it?" Owen asked, noticing the change. "Dr. Simmons is retiring. He's asking if I'd consider returning to Lordsburg to take over his practice." She looked up, meeting her husband's gaze. "He says the town needs someone with medical knowledge, and my reputation has evolved since we left." Owen leaned against the counter, considering. "What do you think?" "I don't know." Willow reread portions of the letter. "5 years ago, I couldn't wait to leave. Now you're Professor Wade Garrett, respected botanist and medical researcher." Owen smiled. "Quite a change from the mad Wade girl, indeed." She folded the letter carefully. "Dr. Simmons says the new rail line makes travel between Lordsburg and Tucson much easier now. I could potentially maintain some connection to the university." "You're considering it," Owen observed. "Perhaps." Willow watched James showing his sister the beetle drawing, her heart full at the sight. "Would you want to return? Your position here is secure, our home established." Owen crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "My home is wherever you are, Willow. It always has been. If you feel called to help the people of Lordsburg, even after how they treated you, that only confirms what I've always known about your character." "They weren't all unkind," she reminded him, "and people change. We certainly have. That we have." He kissed her gently. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." Willow nodded, setting the letter aside for now. There was time to consider, to weigh options, to determine what path their future should take. 5 years ago, she had left Lordsburg believing she would never return, that the town's judgment had severed any connection permanently. Now, she understood that life rarely followed straight lines. Sometimes the journey circled back, offering chances to rewrite endings, to transform pain into purpose. The woman who had been labeled mad for her differences might return as a healer, using the very knowledge that had once made her an outcast. "Mama, come see." James called, pointing to where Alina had rolled onto her stomach, pushing herself up on tiny arms. Willow joined her children on the floor, Owen beside her, both of them encouraging their daughter's efforts. In this moment, surrounded by the family they had created, the love they had fought for past hurts seemed distant, future decisions less urgent. "I love you," Owen whispered, his arm around her shoulders. "Lordsburg, Tucson, anywhere in between as long as we're together." "Together," Willow agreed, leaning into his embrace. "That's the only certainty I need." Outside their window, the Arizona landscape stretched toward distant mountains, a different vista than the New Mexico territory they had left behind, yet beautiful in its own way. Like their life together. Unexpected, challenging at times, but richer and more rewarding than either could have imagined when a marshal rode into a small town and met a woman the locals claimed had lost her mind. They had both lost something in finding each other: preconceptions, isolation, the comfortable familiarity of established patterns. But what they had gained in return was immeasurable: partnership, family, purpose, and the profound understanding that sometimes the greatest sanity lies in the courage to follow your heart against all conventional wisdom. As the afternoon sun bathed their home in golden light, Willow looked at her husband and children with a certainty that transcended location, circumstance, or the opinions of others. Whether they remained in Tucson or returned to Lordsburg, whether she continued as a professor or became the town doctor, the essential truth remained unchanged. They had created their own definition of happiness, their own measure of success. And no matter what path they chose next, they would walk it together: the marshal and the mad woman who had found in each other exactly what they needed to be wholly, uncompromisingly themselves.